Obviously, I can rebound. I can pretty much do a lot of things on the court. My motor, that's pretty much why I was able to do those things.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_Beeble. Today we're doing another 2019 NBA draft preview. I'm going to be joined by Eustacchio Raulli of Red Team Scouting to go through some of those prospects that myself and Cole Zwicker didn't go through last week. So go back and check out that preview with Cole. I've had 2 mock drafts in the interim as well. And yesterday, a Sunday show, we had a bonus episode covering the Anthony Davis to the Lakers trade. So go and check out that show as well. But now let's talk some NBA draft. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
And now we bring in Eustacchio Raulli of Red Team Scouting, and you hear him on the Red Team Draft podcast. First time onto the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. So Eustacchio, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Josh.
All right, so we're going to touch on a bunch of draft prospects today for this week's NBA draft. We went through a whole bunch of them last week with Cole Zwicker. We're going to touching on some other ones here. Let's start with the number one guy, who there is absolutely zero doubt that he is going at the number one position, Zion Williamson. We've heard so much about Zion. We know that he's had, statistically the best college season of all time, the highest box score plus minus, true shooting out of anywhere, like just block numbers, steal numbers, all over the place. That the question I have for you with Zion Eustacchio, when we're talking about him translating to the NBA, is about the shooting. Can this shooting, which he shot at an okay percentage from 3, but it was on low volume, can he develop that into at least being somewhat of a threat and not be, I guess, the way that teams have sagged off Giannis over the past couple of years?
I think the shooting is probably not going to be great for most of his career. There's a lot of form issues there. But at the same time, he does seem to have a really good natural touch. So even though his form isn't great, he gets better results from it than you would expect just by looking at it. He might be able to hover a couple points below league average, but I wouldn't expect any consistency unless there's an overhaul on his shooting form.
So obviously last season he had a ridiculously high field goal percentage, and that wasn't coming from his outside shooting. His ability to finish at that high of a rate, is that going to be something he's going to be able to do in the NBA? Because you hear criticisms, that's great, Zion was able to dunk everything playing against accountants. Yeah, his ability to finish at that high of efficiency, is he going to be able to do that at least to some level of efficiency approaching what he did at the college level when he gets against NBA athletes?
It's a good question, and I mean, I'm not sure he'll approach quite what he did against college competition, because 75% inside the arc, that's unreal. But at the same time, I think he gets shortchanged a little bit here. Sometimes it's just like this fantastic dunker that, he was 99th percentile in layup volume and 100th percentile in layup efficiency. He has fantastic touch around the rim, in addition to all those highlight reel blocks that we see on SportsCenter. I do think he's going to be a very high-quality finisher at the NBA level. I think, honestly, he's probably one of the 5 best finishers on the planet right now. But it's probably not quite going to be to the level of what we saw at Duke, because the numbers were just ridiculous. But he'll be up there.
No one's going to be expecting him to be a 70% field goal guy, but this is why he's going to be so excellent from a fantasy point of view. That really high field goal percentage, steal rate, block rate, can rebound. If he shoots a little bit from 3, the scoring. I think he's probably going to end up going in the 3rd round in drafts for this season, and he's going to be a top 10 player within the next couple of seasons. I can see that. The other thing I guess that we need for him to actually elevate himself to this elite fantasy guy, Eustacchio, is the passing. Can he become a guy that can, not quite as like a Blake Griffin type of a passer from that power forward position, maybe like a lower level Julius Randle sort of guy? Can he go to a 3.5, 4 assist type of guy? Can he develop that vision? Has he got that vision to bump those assist numbers up?
I think he does. I think he's a very high IQ basketball player, and he sees the court really well. He does a good job like moving within the offense to open things up for his teammates. Now, the question of will the assist numbers get there? It depends how much of the offense is running directly through him. At Duke, he was an endpoint more so than a starting point. So, with Drew Holiday, with Lonzo Ball facilitating a lot of the offense, it might be hard for him to get really high assist numbers, but it depends how that roster progresses over the next few years. If he's given the opportunity, though, I think he can get up into that like 4.5 assist per game range.
Yeah, that's sort of where I think that he can end up going, and that's going to put him into that top 5, top 4 fantasy area at some point in the next 3 or 4 or 5 seasons. That sort of an area. Let's talk about a guy though whose main strength is generating assists, and that's Ja Morant, the predicted number 2 pick, going to the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm not as high on Ja. I think he's almost definitely going to go at number 2. I'm a bit worried about the shooting. I'm a bit worried about the fact that he didn't have this sort of buzz coming out of his freshman season. Took a really big step forward this year. How convinced are you that Ja is the number 2 player in this draft? Not that he's going to go number 2, but would you take him number 2 if you were Memphis?
It's a good question. I don't think he's the number 2 talent in this draft, but I do think Memphis is a particularly good fit for his game. So I think he should be in the picture there, at least for me, even though I have him ranked about number 6 overall. I think having a stretch big like Jaren Jackson Jr. is so critical to what Ja Morant does. He gets downhill in the half court and in transition, and having that floor spacing from the big man position will help open up his game. Now, I do think there are guys that are more talented than him in this class, even though he's sort of settled into that consensus spot. I think guys like Jarrett Culver or even Brandon Clark, who you talked a lot about with Cole the other day, I like players like that a little bit more than these primary creators that maybe are not going to get to that elite level. But Ja Morant's a good player. He's a good prospect and maybe was a little bit underrated coming into this season. So it doesn't shock me that he's in the upper half of the lottery now.
He's another one of these guys that we saw, Trae Young come on the second half of last season as a fantasy prospect. I could see Ja potentially putting up not those numbers, the shooting numbers or necessarily the scoring that Trae did, but his ability to generate assists, get an okay number of steals, be a strong free throw shooter. I guess one of the big worries we have there for Morant is his lack of girth. Like he's a very, very skinny guy.
Yeah.
Defensively, that's going to be a bit of a problem. But I guess going to a team like the Grizzlies, especially if they trade away Mike Conley, they're not going to be like, well, we can't play Morant because he's getting killed defensively. They're going to get him out there. They're going to try and develop him. But what about the shot? Like he hasn't been an elite type of shooter really in any stretch. He's a good free throw shooter. Is there hope there in terms of his form? Does it look like he can become a solid 3-point shooter, or is it always going to be a downfall in his game?
I think it depends on the type of three-pointers, really. I have hope that he's going to be a good spot-up threat, a good catch-and-shoot guy down the road. And the free throw numbers lead into that. He's good when he's able to just set up. But the problem off the dribble is that he doesn't have very good deceleration. And that means he's often off balance on his pull-up three-point shots. If you look at his pull-up three-point makes throughout the year, they were basically shots that the defense was absolutely giving him completely. They just conceded that shot, so he didn't have to rush at all. In the NBA, he's going to face a bit more pressure defensively, and so that pull-up three-pointer, I don't think we'll see that develop, at least not for quite a long time. But the spot-up three, it should be there with reasonable consistency.
I think we should have decently high hopes for him from a fantasy point of view. That high assist rate, decent steals, the good free throw shooting, not a bad rebounder, get some scoring in there. There is a whole lot to like about him. And I think when we're looking at dynasty value of these guys, in terms of how we're picking them, I think Zion at 1 and Morant at 2 is probably going to be the way most of those dynasty drafts go. There might be some other guys that jump up, but his translations look pretty good from a fantasy point of view coming across. Is there any worry about the knee surgery he had recently?
I'm not an expert on injuries, but I didn't get the impression that that's anything to worry about long term.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. It looks like he probably won't be back in time for Summer League, but not any sort of long-term issue. But a guy that did have some knee issues that really limited his sample size throughout the season, Eustacchio, was Darius Garland from Vanderbilt. We saw like 4 full games and then another half or a little bit of a fifth game. So it's really hard to get a full view of him. He looked like he was going to be the guy that was going at number 4 to the Lakers. Of course, that pick now belongs to the Pelicans, so that's far from a fait accompli that he goes there. Is he... Yeah, in terms of ball handlers, would you have him as a better option than Morant? You said you had Morant at 6. Would you have Garland ahead of him?
Yeah, I have actually the top 3 point guards like back to back. So I think any one of them could end up the best. Garland has the highest variance of that group. He's the riskiest one because we have such a small sample and also because he's such a small body. But at the same time, the skills that he flashed in those 4 games were outstanding. He's the best ball handler of the 3, and he showed legitimate scoring skills at every level of the defense, both on and off the ball. So he can shoot spot-ups, he can shoot off movement, he can shoot pull-up threes, the best pull-up three-point shooter in this draft. And he also showed, like on the interior, he has a lot of good little manipulations of his defender on the interior just to create these small windows that enable him to be efficient around the rim, even though he's not an explosive athlete. So he's a very creative finisher, and he has a good mid-range game as well. So I think I'm optimistic about him being perhaps the best scoring prospect in this draft outside of Zion. But at the same time, he needs to work on his decision-making with the ball. He's not necessarily that team offensive engine that Ja Morant is. He's probably more of like a combo guard that's going to maybe be better as a number 2 option. So that's a concern. And then on the defensive end with his small frame and his limited athleticism, he's going to be targeted there. So it's sort of a give and take with Garland. There is some definite risk with the injuries added into that. But there's some unique skills that are not present in any other prospects in this draft. So he's an interesting one.
He's got very similar measurements to Morant, both 6'3", about 170 pounds, so that slight frame. And interestingly enough, Morant as a sophomore is only a couple of months older than Garland. So Morant is quite young as a freshman from what I get. He's about the same old age as Cam Reddish. Morant as a sophomore, about the same age as Cam Reddish, who's a freshman. So he's one of those sort of younger type sophomores. But back to Garland, we got is that limited sample size, but the limited sample size, the assist numbers are so low, the defensive stats, the steal rate is really low. Is that something that is realistic to extrapolate out, or going back from his high school days, AAU sort of stuff, was he not a great distributor? Was he not good at getting in passing lanes? Because those are 2 things which, for point guards in fantasy, really have a big impact. If you can't get a decent steal rate or a decent assist rate, then your value really drops. And that's why, to me, coming out based on these stats, he's significantly lower than Morant in terms of fantasy value. So is there any upside in those assist and steal numbers for Garland?
Yeah, I think those have been pretty consistent weaknesses for him. And although I will say this about his time at Vanderbilt, it wasn't that he was an unwilling passer. His teammates just weren't able to finish very often. He set them up pretty well in certain circumstances. But at the same time, his passing accuracy needs work. The way he delivers the ball is not always on target and in the shooting pocket. So I think he'll have middling numbers there. Like for a point guard, probably a 5 assist guy per 36 minutes, as opposed to the better point guards are up around 7 or 8. So I think he'll be okay, but yeah, those will likely, he's not going to be a multi-category contributor like a Ja Morant is. He's mostly giving you his value in his scoring.
A guy like Damian Lillard is a player who obviously has had a lot of fantasy basketball and NBA success with being a lower assist and low steals sort of a guy. So I guess there is a template for a guy who's an elite level scorer and an excellent shooter to get into that upper levels. Of course, getting Garland to Lillard's level is a huge step to be able to get to that area, but Lillard's been able to do that by averaging 6 assists and 0.8 steals per game, which are relatively low numbers for those elite type prospects, but doing it on high free throw volume, high percentage, efficient shooting, obviously huge scoring and big large volume of three-pointers. So there is that I guess prototype or something to look for to say the guys who don't generate those numbers can get up to that level. Let's talk about a guy in a different mold though. We're looking at Deandre Hunter now from Virginia. a guy that in terms of statistical translations, they don't look great. We know that his value coming out as a defender, but the steal and block rates were pretty low coming out of Virginia. Is that a scheme thing there with the Cavaliers?
Yeah, I think he will do better as far as his steal rate in the NBA. I actually was curious about this, and I charted a bunch of team steals for Virginia, and what I found was that Deandre Hunter was a guy that initiated the bad pass or whatever led to the steal, but often, like, say, a Ty Jerome was the one who actually got credited with the steal. So he was making an impact on their team steal percentage. I think in what I tracked, about 120 steals, he had the second most steal shares on the team, but he was usually on the front end of those plays where he was applying pressure, and that led to somebody else intercepting a pass. So I think that's something that we saw pretty consistently with the Virginia scheme, because there was a similar effect with their big men like Diakite and Huff. So I think in a more traditional defense, there's definitely upside for him to have a respectable steal rate, at least. I don't know that he'll be outstanding in that regard, but he should be able to be average for a small forward in that respect.
What about his shooting? Because the shooting numbers look good coming out of college, but how real is that? How many of those are NBA length threes? Can is he at any ability to create his own shot, or is he going to be dependent on others? Is he going to be fine as a catch and shoot type of guy, or are there real concerns despite the high percentage that he shot?
I think he's probably dependent, but I think the percentages are fairly real. I mean, he had a really good number from NBA range threes. And if you look at his synergy breakdown, he had actually higher efficiency on guarded catch and shoots than unguarded, which means he's able to maintain his form even when well contested. And that's something that I picked up on film as well. He's very tall, has long arms, and has very sound form. And he just doesn't rush his form even when players are coming out to contest him. Now, not a lot of three-pointers get blocked in the NBA level. There was that highlight with Zion coming across from the paint to block a shot once, but there weren't many other instances of him getting blocked on the perimeter, even with his somewhat slow release in the NCAA level, and I don't think that's really a major concern. He's probably a corner spacer in the NBA, and I think he's probably going to be a 38 to 40% guy doing that. The free throw percentage has been very good the last couple of years, and I don't really have any concerns with his form in particular. And even on his misses, we charted some shots over the course of the year, and he had the most accurate misses of any player that we tracked, about 20 guys in this class total.
I guess it's going to come down to whether he can get the volume of those shots up to really have an impact in fantasy. If he's able to shoot at that high percentage, he needs to be able to get that volume up, which it might be a bit of a concern considering where he's going to fit in that offensive hierarchy of whatever team he goes to. But a guy who's going to have no problem at least trying to get his shots off is Coby White, the point guard from North Carolina. Some talk of him going number 6 to the Suns. Maybe he's going at number 7 to the Bulls. We've heard of promises for him in that upper end of the lottery. A guy that showed some shot-making skills. How do we look at him as a point guard prospect in comparison to those other two, Garland and Morant?
So I consider Coby White the safest of the three prospects. His role at the next level, he can, at the very least, play a combo guard role where he's initiating the offense and also be able to space the floor as an off-ball guy. I think, he's probably one of the better catch and shoot guys in the class. I would probably rank him about third or fourth as a catch and shoot threat. And that's supported by 80% free throw percentage. And the question is whether he's going to ever develop into that primary initiator that can drive the offense. And that could go either way. He did a good job at North Carolina, but his role was relatively small. 27% usage, 25% assist rate. Those are combo guard type numbers. And one thing though, North Carolina didn't run a lot of pick and roll, especially high pick and roll, which is what would best take advantage of Coby White's skill set. He's so quick in the open floor. If you set a screen for him just after crossing half court, allowing him to get downhill, that would be the most advantageous way to take advantage of that speed, getting him into the teeth of the defense and causing chaos. And so if his NBA team really puts effort into developing him in that role, I think there's a lot of upside here as well, in addition to him being a very safe prospect.
He's got some solid translation numbers as well, just marginally ahead of Garland when it comes across, mainly because of that increased assist rate. Would you think he would fit better playing alongside Devin Booker at number 6 or Zach LaVine at number 7?
I think, at least for fantasy purposes, the fit in Phoenix would probably be ideal. They have pairing him with another ball handler just makes his role a lot easier. It'll be a smooth transition because he's capable of playing off the ball and amplifying Booker, but also taking possessions where he's running the offense for them. And that vertical threat of Ayton on the interior, there's a lot of weapons there. Now, in Chicago, I feel like he would have to take on a greater share of the ball handling responsibility, and that might be a little bit too much pressure early in his career. I think you want to bring him along slowly in that regard, so I'd lean Phoenix.
Okay, let's go on to another guy who's, I guess, quite divisive amongst draft people, scouting community, and that's Cam Reddish, who had a very disappointing season at Duke this season. Barely, was able to get involved at all. The shooting percentages weren't there. He had, really, really poor numbers that he posted, just 13 points, under 2 assists. The steal rate was really nice from him, but the shooting wasn't there. And I've heard some people, the shooting's fine. It's just that he didn't fit into this environment playing alongside Barrett and Williamson, and my counter that often is, well, he's going to be playing with better players in the NBA as well. So fitting into that role is going to be, I feel it's going to be tough for Reddish, but have you got any sort of counter to that? Do you see him actually being a better player in an NBA environment with better shooting and better players around him? Can he adapt to that role that he struggled to adapt to in Duke last season?
I think it's possible. I think the season at Duke definitely showed us some of the limitations that maybe we weren't aware of with him coming from high school, thinking he might be able to do more on-ball shot creation, and that just wasn't evident at all at Duke. But as more of a just true three-point threat from the perimeter, a guy that can shoot the pull-up three, the off-movement three, as well as the catch-and-shoot three, I think there's a reasonable basis to project him to do well in that regard. The shooting percentage wasn't great. It was 33%, but he shot well from the free throw line, 77%, and moreover, the three-point volume was outstanding. It was like 99th percentile three-point volume, and that's often a good indicator of shooting ability moving forward for young guys like this. I think the percentage will come around. I'm not sure what the ceiling is in that regard, but if I were to throw a number at it, maybe a 37 or 38% shooter that's able to get off a lot of volume, sort of like J.R. Smith almost. Not always deadly accurate, but he can get off his shot really well. So in an offensive role, that's sort of what I envision. And he's a guy that will probably bring solid steal and block numbers on the defensive end. Not going to contribute much as far as rebounding and assists, however.
That was the sort of thing that I was going to mention with Reddish. Like he did struggle during that season at Duke. We know that. But coming in with 2 translatable numbers, and maybe even 3, with the steal rate being high, the three-point volume being high, and the free throw shooting being relatively solid, it's a good enough base to work on there. The scoring outside of the threes needs to be worked on. I'm not ever convinced that we're ever going to see big assist numbers for him, but there is something there in terms of at least those couple of categories, the steals and the threes, which might be able to be an impact, and then having that shooting. And he couldn't be a worse shooter, I guess, overall from the field than what he was in college. So there is, I guess, some level of improvement coming from there with him. Do you think that he is, not that he's going to go in the top 10, would you take him in the top 10?
I would not, but I have him around like 15 or so on my board. But, it's not a bad pick in the top 10. I just don't think there's much of a ceiling there, to be honest, not much upside, but I think he'll be good within the role that is ideal for him as that floor spacing guy that can defend multiple positions on the other end.
I want to talk about another guy who was very highly touted coming out of high school and disappointed in the college ranks, also played in North Carolina, and that is Nasir Little for the Tar Heels. could barely even get on the court, only 18 minutes a night for the Tar Heels after coming in as almost like a top 3 guy, I think, coming out of high school when he signed with North Carolina. Just couldn't really get much going. Now, out of those 2 guys, Little and Reddish, which one of those 2 do you feel more comfortable with being an impact NBA player?
I'm more comfortable with Reddish, but there is an argument for Nasir Little as far as if you're looking for a guy that may have some legitimate upside. He didn't show a lot at North Carolina, but to some degree that was role related. Like, he was sort of stuck between the 3 and the 4 positionally, and those are very different roles in the North Carolina system. And the 4 requires a bigger body type, more muscle, and he added a lot of weight from his high school time, and that sort of took away some of his speed and agility. It just left him in this weird place where he just was not productive doing much of anything on the basketball court. But it looks like since the season ended, he's been focusing on trimming down and focusing more on becoming that small forward type player. And so, maybe this situation impacted him more than we realize, and there's some untapped potential there. But based on what we saw at North Carolina, it's definitely a risk. There's no glossing over that. He did not play well. About the only thing he showed at a high level was the ability to finish around the rim. He's an explosive vertical leaper, so he has that going for him. And, he shot well on free throws as well. So, maybe it works out, but I would say Cam Reddish is a safer bet right now.
The other thing that Little's numbers translated okay with were his rebound rate. It came out, he averaged 4.6 rebounds in those 18 minutes, which, taking that out to 30 minutes a game comes out as a decent enough rebound rate, which gives him some level of value in that area. But as you mentioned, he has a lack of assists. The steal and block numbers aren't great. The block numbers are actually okay. The steal numbers aren't quite there, but there is still a lot to work on with Little, and he is quite a risky prospect in terms of overall upside. A guy that is being mocked a lot in the lottery, Eustacchio, is Rui Hatcher Maura from Gonzaga. I don't really know where he fits in an NBA team as a starter. To me, he feels a little bit. Maybe this is just a completely off comparison, a little bit Frank Kaminsky-esque, like a guy that can score and get some rebounds, but defensively and vision-wise and outside shooting, like is it ever going to get there? I just worry that he's never going to find a role big enough on an NBA team to actually be an impact sort of a guy at all.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm very concerned about his translation to the NBA level. You look at the shot distribution, he only took 36 three-pointers last year against 429 two-point shots. And that's just not who he's going to be at the next level. He's not going to be able to have the offense run through him in the mid-post, and he needs to be able to change his identity to a more perimeter-oriented game and a more complementary game where he's trying to amplify those around him rather than dominating the ball and being that ball-stopping, scoring threat. It kind of reminds me of how Thomas Robinson was this dominant college player, but his game just did not work at the NBA level. And I'm concerned that Hachimura is going to follow in that path where what he does just isn't going to work in the NBA. That said, he was a hyper-efficient player, 64% true shooting on high volume. And so he's worth a shot, but I'm just concerned that teams are going to take that shot too early in the draft.
He's also got these limitations with low steal, low block, low assist rate, not hitting those threes, as you mentioned. Rebounds are okay, but they're not through the roof type of numbers. And I do think, he is going to probably end up going a little bit too high in drafts and the fantasy translation stuff. Like, if you're not on the court, you can't actually put up numbers. And I think that's going to be a concern for him throughout the next couple of seasons. I want to talk about Kevin Porter Jr., another player who we have, limited sample size after that suspension at USC. Some really weird numbers. But in terms of guys, and when we get out of the top 10 or so, the upside there seems to be the most tantalizing with Porter. What can we take out of that limited season we saw from Porter at USC, and can he be more than just that guy who wows everybody with electric dribbling moves and finishes? Can he contribute to team basketball? Can he pass? Can he defend? Can he do anything apart from flashy crossovers?
Yeah, that's the big question because his game definitely trends to be more flash than substance. But there's definitely some high-level skills to work with there. He has great ball handling, an NBA level step back right now. My real concern with him is that he just doesn't have a downhill mentality enough. That step back is more a crutch for him rather than something he uses to open up downhill attacks. And so if he is able to alter his shot selection and use these step back as a tool to unlock team offense, get downhill, pass out to teammates, then he would be a very good player on offense. But a lot of times guys like that have trouble changing that mentality. And he is a very good jump shooter. So he is likely to continue to be reliant on those 3-point shots, those long mid-range shots. So I think it's a long shot for him to contribute to winning basketball, but he's probably going to put up pretty good scoring numbers on reasonable efficiency, and he's a very athletic player, so the steal and block rates will probably be pretty solid. Passing numbers, maybe less so, but yeah.
Now, with Porter, one thing that is really curious and really stands out to me when you look at his numbers is the fact that he shot 52% from the free throw line. He shot 41% from three, which is a strong number across 68 attempts. It's not a huge volume, but then went 24 of 46 from the free throw line. Which one of those numbers is real? Is he a bad shooter, as evidenced by the 52% from the line, or is he a good shooter, as evidenced by the 41% from the three-point line? Where do we go back in terms of AAU ball? Like, which one of these is real?
Yeah, I don't remember the free throw percentage in AAU offhand, but I would say it's somewhere between the two. I don't think he's going to be quite like a 41% level 3-point shooter, but I think he will be reasonably accurate from the perimeter. I do think his shooting form seems to work better in live action than when he is standing at the free throw line for whatever reason. It's weird, but some guys are like that though, and like especially guys that like to use their dribble to set up their shot. He's a better off the dribble shooter than he is just on catch and shoots, which is unusual, but some guys have that trend. And so the disconnect with the free throw percentage is somewhat natural in that respect. But at the same time, 41% is probably exaggerating how efficient we can expect him to be. I would expect more like maybe the 36 to 37% range at the NBA level with decent mid-range numbers.
So like so many players in this class, and I've talked about this so much, there's just so many of these combo guards who can't necessarily contribute to or you create for others, and Porter's another one of those guys. You've got these other players like Alexander Walker, even Darius Garland with the low assist numbers. These score first guards, and that is a limiting factor for their overall fantasy value. Another guy I want to talk about who fits into this other class, which seems to really permeate this entire draft class, is undersized centers, and that's PJ Washington from Kentucky, a guy that played a lot of center, probably not going to be a center much in the NBA, but 6'8", a guy that, again, undersized, like so many of these players, how it seems to be in this class. Where does PJ fit on an NBA team? Is he one of those guys that played center in college, but it's not going to be able to do it in the NBA, and then isn't a good enough shooter to play at the 4? Or do you think he can be that guy that plays as a 4 in the NBA?
I'm optimistic regarding PJ as being an NBA 4. I'm not sure if that'll be in a starting lineup or off the bench. It's sort of borderline with his ability level. But, the shot looked pretty good in the limited sample we have, even though his free throw percentage again is in that like 66% range. So many prospects from this class are like between 66 and like 73, but nonetheless, it looks good in practice, and I think he's a hard worker, and moreover, he just impacts the game in so many little ways. He was really the engine for this Kentucky team that somehow managed to be a top 10 team and top 15 on both ends of the court. He was just so integral to that success with his good team defense, with his rebounding, and he's an underrated passer. Like one thing I always look for with prospects that are post-oriented in college is how often they pass out of the post. Both PJ Washington and Grant Williams were outstanding in this regard. And I think he's going to be a very good play-through player. You could use him as a pick-and-pop guy that can keep the ball moving through the pick and roll. So I think he is going to be a useful player. I'm just not quite sure whether he'll be in that 16 to 20 minute per game off the bench role, or if he has enough juice to stick as a starter and like the number 4 option for a team in the starting unit.
I talk about this quite often on this podcast about Kentucky guys and the skill development that seems to happen with them, or the extra parts of their game that seem to flourish after they leave college. So we had guys like Karl Anthony Towns, obviously Bam Adebayo, there as big men who then, when they got to the NBA, we saw that passing start to develop more. So is Washington, do you think, in that sort of a class where these guys can start to really show off that passing ability that they didn't show as much in college?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible here. Like, there were several guards on the team that were handling the ball. They got the assists in this offense, but a lot of the passes that kept the offense moving in the half court belong to PJ Washington. They don't show up on the stat sheet, but I think in the NBA, there's an opportunity here for him to become that pick and pop guy that can facilitate on the short roll. And I think those assist numbers will get a little bit better moving forward.
What about his teammate, Keldon Johnson, a small forward, 3-and-D type of, archetype player, 6'6", on the wing. But in terms of my initial fantasy translations, comes out as the worst player out of all the first round options there, just because of the numbers he put up in college. Insanely low block and steal numbers. The shooting wasn't great. What does he do that can make him an NBA player?
If he's going to stick in the NBA, it's going to be on the back of his off-ball offense. He's a good spot-up guy in catch-and-shoot situations, and he's very good at attacking closeouts. He has a good floater that helps him to finish well even when there are rim protectors nearby. And so that spot-up and attacking closeout role off the ball, he's a good cutter. He can shoot off screens a little bit. So he's a multifaceted threat to help amplify players off the ball. But on the other end of the court, he's just not doing a lot. The rebounding is not that great. And like you said, the steal and block numbers, he was framed as this 3-and-D guy, but I only really see it on one end of the court. So I'm worried that he's not going to get enough playing time in the NBA to be worthwhile, because he's just not good enough within his role to earn those minutes.
He blocked just 6 shots last season across his 1,100 minutes. That's like Evan Fournier level of block numbers. 28 steals as well. These are just really, really small in terms of contributing on that end. And if you have numbers that low in fantasy, you need to be able to do something else. Big assist numbers, big scoring numbers, and he doesn't appear like he's going to be able to do any of those things. So I think he is a guy that, when you're looking at fantasy value for these guys, his value will be significantly lower than what his actual draft slot is. I want to talk about another guy that sort of fits in with that PJ Washington, Keldon Johnson sort of size player, and that's a player who's coming off a torn ACL, Chuma Akeki from Auburn. In terms of those three guys, Johnson 6'6", Washington 6'8", Akeki's 6'8", as well. They'll play that 3, 4, 5. Well, not Washington doesn't play the 3, but in that sort of an area. Is Akeki the best of that group, even including the ACL injury?
Yeah, that's the catch-22. Will he come back and be the same player that he was? But if he does, I think he's the best player of that group. Washington's very good as well, but I would take Okeke by a small margin, just because the defensive anticipation that he showed at Auburn, he has such quick hands and great timing. You see that reflected in his steal and block numbers. Just how he got those within the flow of the defense. He wasn't chasing steals, but he just naturally was making plays within the flow of the game. And so I think he has the potential to be a very high-level defender that can flex between the 3 and the 4. And on the other end of the court, he's mostly going to be a floor spacer. He'll score here and there, attacking closeouts or cuts at the rim, but mostly you're going to see him spotting up from the corner probably. And he's definitely capable of contributing on the boards on both ends of the court.
last week I did a couple of mock draft shows, once just myself making the picks and another one with a bunch of listeners coming in and making picks for certain teams. And one of the biggest disparity players that we had across those mock drafts was Bruno Fernando. In the listener mock draft, he went in the lottery. And I think for me, I picked him in the second round. So there is a lot of variance in Fernando. Where do you see him going? Because again, you see him mocked in many different places across many different sites. What do you see with Fernando? Is he an upside type of guy? Is he one of those players? I mean, this is how I see him, as he's a centre, but was there value in taking a centre who is limited like Fernando early in the draft?
For me, I don't see the value in doing it now. Positional value is something that's very important to me in draft philosophy, and a player like Fernando, he does some good things on the basketball court. There's no denying that, but he seems like a very replaceable player to me at the NBA level. There's so many good big men in the league, and like even on veteran minimum contracts every year, there's good players that you can get that are worth rotation minutes. And I'm not sure Fernando is going to be a cut above those guys that we see on those veteran minimum contracts. I mean, Milwaukee got Brook Lopez for peanuts last summer, and there's several other big men around the league that played big rotation roles. I don't see the value in drafting a guy like that in the first round, but he's a good player. There's no denying the numbers he put up at Maryland, and I understand why some people like him, but personally, I just don't see the upside to taking a player like that.
Let's talk about another big man then who, again, or maybe his draft position is even more wildly different, and that is Bol out of Oregon. Again, I had him, I think, in the second round in my mock. People are saying there's no way he gets out of the lottery. The concern with the broken foot, the concern with the high center of gravity, and the defensive limitations of him being just pushed around. Great rim protector. The shooting looks fantastic. There's concerns about his commitment to the game, the injury history. Where are you with Bol in terms of, can he actually be an NBA player, or is it just one of those we're just taking it for name value and size and potential, and there's a massive chance that it doesn't turn out?
There's definitely a lot of risk with Bol. I mean, the injuries and just the fact that he's so thin at the height he is, he's absolutely going to get pushed around, and whether he can stay on the court despite that is a valid question. It's worth noting that his father stayed on the court really well for about a 5 or 6 year stretch, despite being even taller and even thinner than Bol. But I don't know. I think I'm probably... where I've settled with him is that I don't think he's going to be this ultra high upside guy, but I think he definitely has a role at the NBA level, sort of like almost like a Channing Frye on offense, but on defense, he's obviously has extra length and probably a little bit less defensive IQ and about the same motor. So wherever that gets you, but probably a situational big man that can space the floor on offense. And on defense, he's sort of like this walking one-man zone that can't really guard anybody individually. So, I mean, he's such a unique player. It's hard to project someone like that, but the shooting touch he has is absolutely real. And he might be one of the 3 or 4 best shooters in this draft class, despite being about a foot taller than some of the other best shooters. But bottom line for me, I would probably take him late teens or so. I think it's worth a shot just to see what he is, because if he works out, he could be a very unique player, a player that gives your team a tactical advantage. You can't find a guy like that on the waiver wire, right? So
yeah, that's true.
It's a risk though. Like, there are paths where he's not going to stay on the court at all, whether it be because of ineffectiveness or injury, but that chance for uniqueness is something that I always look for.
He's also came out translated really highly in terms of fantasy projections, the scoring, rebounding, threes, blocks, efficiency, and both him and Bruno Fernando, 2 big men. We talked about the lack of good free throw shooting across this class. So these are guys who are shooting free throws better than a lot of these wings like Zion, like Barrett, these sort of players who have struggled with their free throw percentage. These are guys coming in with pretty strong free throw percentages as well. So there is some value in that sort of a player. One guy I do want to talk about, we talked about an injury to Akeki in the ACL. Well, there's a guy who's got double the injury risk, and that's Jonte Porter, who's torn that ACL twice. The second one, admittedly, he came back too early and then re-tore that ACL. He was a guy that had a potential to be looking at a top 10 pick this season as a big man who can pass, who can shoot a bit, really a valuable player in today's NBA, but this injury seems to have scared teams off a lot. He looks to be falling well into the second round. In terms of him as a healthy player, would you have seen him as a top 10 sort of a prospect in this draft?
He probably would have been top 5 for me if he stayed healthy and had an expected progression from freshman year to sophomore year. He's just a very high IQ basketball player, not just relative to other 18-year-olds, but just relative to even NBA players. He's very smart. He sees the game 2 steps ahead. And even though he's not a high-level athlete, like the combine testing last year did not go well for him at all. But if you look at him on the court, he's often in position anyway because he's reading the game faster than everybody else on the court. His passing is spectacular. And, he had pretty good block and steal numbers. His steal percentage was higher than most of the lottery centers from last year, even though he's not as athletic. So, he's a player that's just sort of like an Al Horford that amplifies everybody around him. I don't know that he has that same talent level, but he fits that same mold that he's going to amplify the team around him. And so the injuries, though, I mean, you have to factor that in. And it's definitely a trend with both with him personally and throughout his family. His brothers and sisters have been injury prone. And, there's definitely a lot of risk there. I'm probably still would take him before the second round, like he's being mocked right now. I think it's a good bet, probably in the late first round. Personally, I would want to get him on that 4-year guaranteed contract where if he's healthy, you're getting some extra value out of it. But I can understand why teams are tentative in that regard, because if he gets hurt again after this injury, there's a very real chance that he becomes a sunk cost. And so we're approaching that point with him, but there's still a chance that he could become this phenomenal player that we thought he could be after his freshman season.
The last guy I want to talk to you about here, Eustacchio, is a player who is always interesting when I do these translations and guys come out right at the top or really close to the top that aren't really projected to go in the first 20 picks or 25 picks. And the guy I want to talk about here is Dylan Windler of Belmont, who came out with really strong three-point shooting and high volume scoring, rebounding, steal rate was solid, great free throw percentage, super efficiency, and the translations all look fantastic. But what is going to limit him from actually being a guy that gets onto an NBA court? Or can he be a player that falls through the cracks, gets picked in the start of that second round, and actually can come in and be an impact guy almost straight away?
Yeah, he's an interesting player. There's very mixed opinions on him on draft Twitter too. I'm personally a little bit lower on him than many people are, but he's an absolute knockdown shooter, and he has great rebounding numbers, and there's a chance that he could come in and be a role player, but I am concerned that just his ability to hold up against tougher competition. We saw this year when he faced higher level teams, his true shooting percentage dropped from 68 for the season to 55% against tier A and tier B teams. And that's a considerable drop. Now, that wasn't necessarily consistent throughout his college career, but I'm concerned that the translation isn't going to be as clear cut as we would like it to be. But still, I think he's worth a dart throw in the second round, because there is that upside that if he translates well, he could be a great value pick. He contributes in every facet of the game. It's just a matter of if he's that high-level role player in the NBA or if he's better suited to a competition level like the G League or Euro League.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see exactly where he ends up going, because there is that statistical translation stuff is pretty interesting for Dylan Windler. Eustacchio, thank you for coming on to the show for the first time, making your Locked On Fantasy Basketball debut. Just let everyone know where they can find your work, where they can find you on Twitter, and where they can find more stuff from Red Team Scouting.
So you can find our work at redteamscouting.com, and you can follow us on Twitter at redteamscouting and me personally at EVR1022.
All right, so go ahead and follow Eustacchio over there and listen to their podcast. It's been really informative to listen to that. That's the Red Team Draft podcast, so go download and listen to that as well. Eustacchio, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me on, Josh.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Make sure you are subscribing to this podcast and doing so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on Stitcher, and on and on Spotify. Give it a 5-star rating if you're enjoying the show. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball as well. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. PJ Washington.